Domain and the DDD approach have come up repeatedly in the various editions of our conference. Sometimes it was easy, and sometimes pretty challenging. Even stands that it's always easy. He shows that implementing DDD is not the problem, and it's not something that will make your project so complicated that you'll spend twice as much time delivering it. Contrary to common misconceptions, he'll demonstrate that integrating DDD principles doesn't necessarily complicate project delivery.
May the force be with you.
Or may the force be with the domain. Take a listen. Ladies and gentlemen, even Penović is on the stage.
So, hi everyone. Is this okay? Yeah. Hi everyone. So, I'll be presenting you domain-driven design presentation with a focus on PHP. You all here are PHP developers probably, at least most of you. Let's start with a little bit about me. So, I've been in business for about 13 years and I'm working on various different projects. I was mostly backend developer and mostly working on backend side of the project, but I was also involved in all kind of stuff in various projects, from the front-end mobile, functional requirements, and yeah, all the things that you must do in order to deliver the project. I will try to present you some experience I got from delivering those projects and working on those various projects, and talk you about a little bit about that domain-driven design, what is some term that is popular, especially in last maybe few years. Little bit about agenda, what we'll be talking about. How many of you are working on or was working with some DDD concepts? Great. I will go through some theoretical stuff about DDD, what it is, and how it should be done. And then we will go through some real-life implementations and see how we can implement it in our project, especially PHP project. See where to use it, why to use it, and how to set up all those things. So let's start. What is DDD? DDD is just a software design approach. So it's not, it's some high-level thing. It gives us importance of the domain because the domain is something that is bound to the project that we are working on. We are not working on a project because we are bored. We are working on a project because we must deliver some project, we must deliver some software that will work in a production and that will do some business. It will help some business to do some things easier, faster, more efficient. And that's why we are building our project. That's why someone pays us to build it. So the domain is core part of that, of our software. So the importance of DDD concept gives us some boundary of how we should structure our project and how should we focus in our project in the domain. And that's the most important part, the domain. Also, it gives us ubiquitous language, which should be some common language between everyone working on a project. And that's one important part, because probably most of us saw a situation where some guy from the product use one term and some developer use another term and another developer use completely opposite term of that, and we are all thinking about same thing, but we are saying that thing completely differently. And then we have a lot of misunderstandings and we don't know what we are referring to, but in the end we are talking about the same thing. So domain-driven design and entire concept gives us some ubiquitous language, which we would define our domain and define things in our domain. And that domain is the core of the business. We will follow that, and we should structure our project based on those requirements and those domain. So what really is DDD? It puts focus on business needs, because like I said in the start of the presentation, we are building our software because business needs that software. It needs to do some job in order to be faster, better, more efficient in doing the business. It also is technology agnostic. So I will present things in PHP and how it is possible to implement it in PHP and use it in PHP, but it's technology agnostic. So it's not focused on one technology, and it's just high-level concept how to structure things. Of course, when you start implementing it with some specific technology, either PHP, Python, JavaScript, don't care what, there are some rules we must take special care on to implement it successfully. But generally, DDD is just a concept which is technology agnostic and which just gives us some base concepts of how to structure our things. So this is probably one of the most popular pictures about hexagonal architecture. Then when people see this, they, especially people new to DDD, say, oh, what is this? How should I implement this? This is too complicated. I don't understand this. So I will try to focus on the things how this can be implemented really easily. And when you implement it and when you start doing things like this, then this picture makes sense. And then you understand it's not so complicated like it seems on first. So to continue further, we have hexagonal architecture. What is that? So like we said, DDD is a concept. DDD is just concept how we should structure our software and how we should do our business. Because DDD can't be made only by developer. I, as a backend developer, I said I'm doing DDD, and other people in my company, front-end developers, mobile developers, business analysts, product managers, they don't care about that. We all must be on the same page, and we are all using DDD. And then, while using DDD, I, as a developer, must implement it inside the code. I need to have some architecture that could provide me implementation of DDD concept. And hexagonal architecture is one of the maybe most popular architecture how to implement DDD in some software. There are some other also different architectures, but in the end they are pretty much similar, and they provide you same guidance how to implement DDD in a software. So hexagonal architecture is a pattern, and it makes component exchangeable at any level, which is a good thing when you think about it. It also puts that business logic as a main thing in a software, which is also, when you think about it, good thing, because that business part is and business logic is an important thing that we must conform to, and we must implement it in our software in order to have successful software and in order to have project deliver successfully. It's so oriented about the domain and that business logic, but it supports other technical things that we must implement inside the project. So we must have, for example, HTTP request that will come into our software. Some front-end application is making request towards our backend. They communicate via HTTP. They have maybe some other protocol they communicate. They have different types of responses returned by HTTP request, for example, XML or JSON or something like that. So that's all supported, and that all must live in the project. But we need to implement that. We need to have that part, of course. We need to make HTTP requests. We need to allow users to ping our endpoint, and we need to have an option to return that JSON, for example. But our software should be built on that business business logic and that domain that is important, and not towards the HTTP request or database storage. We can store things in any data store we want. We can retrieve data from anywhere where we see that it's understandable and good thing to retrieve data from, in our case. And the hexagonal architecture allows us that, to store wherever we want, store data wherever we want, to make any kind of HTTP requests, to make any kind of communication between the components, but it gives us a focus on real business logic. So the hexagonal architecture, it's a set of principles and guidelines. Again, hexagonal architectures can also be implemented in any project. Python, PHP, JavaScript, we can implement it wherever we want. Its approach, it's also language agnostic framework to implement DDD. And its structure, so we can implement it with the DDD in focus. So what hexagonal architecture isn't? It's not set of rules that we must follow. It's not some concrete implementation of some specific technology, and it's not something that will fit for everyone. But it is something that you can implement in your project in order to support easier implementation of DDD. So it will support you to focus on real business rules. It will support you to focus on real business needs and real product needs. And it will support you to structure your project in such a way that it's easy to maintain and it's easy to understand by others. So other people can continue to work on your project, can understand why are you doing that project, what are the things that you try to accomplish in the project, and why you try to accomplish it in such way. So it will allow you to do it in that way, but it's not some specific strict set of rules that you must conform to. And of course, those guidelines you should take it as guidelines and not to blindly follow them in all of your projects or to blindly follow them on everything you are doing. You are allowed to move somewhat away from those guidelines if your project demands that. That's perfectly normal thing, and it's not, like it says here, it's not one size fits all solutions. It's not perfect solution for everyone and something that you must follow. So, when you look at all those rules and all those theoretical things around DDD and hexagonal architecture as implementation of that DDD, then you imagine yourself you are starting some backend project in PHP, and you have some business rules that you must conform, and that's someone who ordered that project from you, who will pay to you to deliver that project. Someone said to you some things that they want their application works. So for example, they said, I want an application, I want reservation system. That reservation system should be, for example, for this meeting room. So I'll have few meeting rooms, I will have some time slots, people can come and reserve time slot. After the reservation, that time slot is full. After that time slot ends and people go out from the room, then other people can reserve it, can come into the room. And of course, if this room is reserved, then other room can be reserved or cannot be reserved. So they should be treated as separate rooms. So those are some high-level requirements given to you by someone who wants from you to make a project. And that's the core of the domain, that's the core of the business. That man does not care about the database, technology stack, back-end, front-end, where you will store the data, which database you will use. That's up to you. You are a developer, someone is paying you to know what to use in that particular situation. But that what I said, some hard rules about those meetings rooms and time frames, you must book the room, the bookings must not overlap and things like that. That are the hard rules, that are the rules that business give you. Those are called business logic, and that's the domain. So when you are starting a project, yeah, you can start some standard Symfony, Laravel, Zen project, or even without any framework, and you can start making some for example, you will take relational database, you will start making some database tables, columns, you will define the types of those columns and tables, and yeah, you will create probably some entities or models that will be mapped one-on-one with your database. For example, you will use Doctrine in Symfony, or you will use Eloquent in Laravel, or some other ORM you are familiar to work with. And then you will create some folder, for example, entity. And inside that folder, you will put all those entities, which are really one-on-one mappings to the database. That's okay approach, but if you remember slides from before, you can just stand and start from that domain. You can create one folder called domain, for example, like you see in on presentation. You can create domain, and then in that domain you can logically group things. You can, for example, say, okay, there is some customer that must buy and pay for this room. Then the customer must reserve that room. So I will probably have customer, I will have a room, I will have some reservation, because when customer reserve the room, reservation must be made. Then that reservation, I will have some, let's call it checker, that will check is the room reserved already in some time slot. So yeah, that should be some things that it will cross your mind while creating that. So you can create some object and some classes that conforms to that logic. You can group them in the folders. You can create those entities, those domain objects. Yeah, what in previous example were just an entities, and you can put them there, and you can start from that. And then when in the start you already have some domain and some logic that someone who wants from you to deliver the project set to you, and you are already put everything in one folder and group all those things. And for example, like you see here, you can have some customer management where we will put things about the customer. So it will be maybe some user object with some user properties, because a user can have email, username, first name, last name, and you want to group those things and to put it in that separate folder. For example, there is maybe some device management. Maybe that user can order room with on some device, and we must identify that device, because only allowed users can book a room, because there can't be a situation when anyone can come here and just book a room. Maybe just that's the hard business rule, and we'll have that device management folder, and we will group those objects there. And those objects will then can interact with each other. And we are now not focused on a database. We are not focused on a not database like database, neither on database technology. We will use relational database, NoSQL, or something else. We are not focused on that. We must return HTTP request. We now modeled our domain, and that's the core part of the application. And if you see, it's not so complicated to start like that, just to start making the domain and start making those objects and grouping them together in some folders and grouping their behaviors. So when we start like that and when we modeled our domain, then we can go to our next layer, the application layer. What's the application layer? So that domain objects are just pure business logic copied in our code. And someone must do some things with them. So the application layer is orchestration tool for our domain objects. So that's the application. That's something that is doing something with the domain. Because domain are business rules, and you are talking with the business guys about the domain. You're not talking about application. They don't tell you, store me this in database. They tell you, I need to reserve a room. It's up to you that you will store that in the database, that fact and that action that someone reserved the room, you know that you must store it in the database. But someone who is ordering an application won't tell you that. He'll just tell you, I want possibility to make a reservation. So you must have your application that will orchestrate with the domain objects and with the entire business logic that you put in that domain folder. So you start with the application folder, and in that application folder you will create some things that will do something with the domain. And what you can see, for example, you will have some repository. You will define repository because you want to store those domain objects in the database. It's when you started creating the domain, you didn't think about the database, but in the end you will store things in the database. But you are just not focused on that. You are focused on business logic and focused on that domain and those business rules and interaction with objects. But you are not focused on the database. But in the end, you will need to store things in the database. That's for sure. Then you will have some repository. You will have some, for example, query handler that will handle those queries. Commands, because you need to do something in the system. Create reservation. You will need to create a reservation. So you will probably dispatch some command. Create reservation command. You will dispatch it in some I don't know, message bus, which will be processed later. And you must do that, and then you will define things that your application will need to do. For example, it can look like this. You'll have some notification, which will be some notification sender interface. You will have some bus that will process those commands, events, queries. You will have some mailer, so you will have an option to send an email. And probably most of things in the application would be interfaces. Why? Because you are instructing the system and you are modeling your application like, I need to do something. I don't care how. So I model the domain. I have some domain objects. I put things there. And then I'll need to do something with that domain. But I don't care how. I will need to have an option to store it in a database. I don't care how. I will need to have an option to send an email. I don't care how. So I'll just create interfaces, mostly. That will just have what the interface is. It's just a contract that all the implementations would have the same methods, with the same arguments and the same return type. And you are just making those contracts, and you are making the, let's call it, statement in the application. I have notification sender. Notification sender must send what? Notification from the domain. Probably. I'll need to send an email. Where? Email from the domain or from the application. I need to have an option to process the command. So I will dispatch some commands. I need to have an option to process them. How? With a Symfony Messenger, with a Rabbit message queue. Will they be asynchronous or asynchronous? I don't care about that. I just need to have an option to do that. My application must do that. And then I start to build things inside that application folder. I start to orchestrate things about my domain. And what you see until now, so we got some requests from some business owner. They want to pay you to build something. They gave you some business requirements, and instead of thinking about database tables and creating the migrations and things like that, you model the domain by their needs. You start modeling domain by their needs, and you put all those requirements there in the domain. And then you started building another layer, which is application layer, which tells you what to do with that domain. What your application must have an ability to do. For example, save something in the database. That's something that you must have an ability to do. And then you created two base folders, domain and application. You put all those logic there, and you already have some good start about modeling things per domain. So you are really starting implementing DDD in your application. And then you add the third layer. It's an infrastructure. In that layer, you will use everything, and you will make concrete things and concrete implementations. If you saw before, so in the domain, we have that pure PHP objects, which tells you behavior between system parts. So it's defining reservation, user, room, things that will interact with each other, bounded to the specific domain. You have application, which also have probably some interfaces just telling you do that, but not how. And you are not using any vendor, you are not using any external services, you are not making any HTTP requests, you are not storing anything in database there, you just define the interface. And then you have this infrastructure part where you're really making concrete implementations. So this part will have concrete implementations of all those interfaces from the application level. So all those repository interfaces or command bus interfaces, which are just interface, and you don't care the real technology using them and doing that the job. Now you implement it inside the infrastructure layer. So there you really make doctrine user repository, for example, which implements that repository that you define in application level. Also, this is the intro inside your application. So we were focused on the domain, we made that reservation room user, but in the end, our front-end application will ping us and will send some HTTP request, for example. So we need to take that HTTP request, validate it, do something with it, and return some JSON. We must do that in the end. So that communication and that part should be done in the infrastructure side. That's why it's called infrastructure. Everything is there. You can use anything, and you are making the concrete implementations. But if you remove that infrastructure part, and if you see there are things like doctrine, like I don't know, maybe Symfony Laravel Zen controller, which is entry point in the application. There is some caching layer, probably Redis or something like that. They live there. But if you remove that part, everything else is really focused on the domain, and it's completely agnostic from that framework and that concrete implementations that you are using. So that's why you moved everything inside the infrastructure. All those things that are, let's call it vendor, because you didn't write your ORM, you are using Doctrine, you are using Eloquent or some other ORM. You didn't wrote your entire HTTP request handler, but you just using, I don't know, Symfony or Laravel request object. So that lives there, but you can at any time swap it inside the infrastructure, and your domain is intact. So domain is domain, and it lives there, is intact. You just put everything inside the infrastructure, those concrete implementation, and you can swap them wherever you want. So that's why you remove it from, remove all those vendors, and you don't use vendor inside domain and application, and you use only inside the infrastructure folder. But again, looking at this dummy example project structure, inside those inside that infrastructure folder, you will have some doctrine implementation, you will have some HTTP request, and yeah, it's not a problem to move that logic inside that separate infrastructure folder. So it's not that big problem, and by doing that, again, we are leaning towards the DDD, and we are again conforming to that hexagonal architecture framework, because we really now separate things in domain, application, and infrastructure. We have 3 base folders, and all the things that we would do if we didn't start doing it like that, we would have that. We would have controller, but it would probably live in some controller folder. We would have our, let's call it domain objects, but it wouldn't be called domain objects, they would be called entities, and they would live inside entity folder. We just separated it inside different 3 different folders and grouped them together by their behavior that they must do. And we now have this structure, and we really separate our application, and it's a little bit more readable and focused towards toward that domain and business logic. And so, for example, like I showed you on that slide with in application, we had that messenger command bus and event bus and query bus interfaces. Now we created their concrete implementations. So they live here. We had some payment gateway interface. So we instructed our system in application, I must process payment, and now we created concrete implementation with Stripe. So Stripe is our, for example, payment processor. And we put that inside the infrastructure. And so all those concrete implementations from the application now lives here. And we can easily swap them. But our business logic will remain the same. We'll have some payment domain because it's a core part of the business. Someone must pay for some service, for some room reservation. You must pay for it, and there will be payment domain object. It lives in a domain. It's not changing. It's there with their properties and their methods. And then we have application which tells us you must process payment. I don't care how. You must process it. You have domain object payment, you must process it. That's defined in application. And then you have concrete implementation in infrastructure with the Stripe, and Stripe is really processing the payments. And tomorrow you can swap Stripe with something else because they give you better prices, better commissions, or easier integration, or I don't care why. You will swap it maybe one day. And you can just swap that implementation in an infrastructure and don't touch entire business logic. Don't touch other parts of the system. And you did the same thing like you would do if you started a project just by doing controller, entity, and maybe payment processor folder. Because you would need to do that. You would need to integrate with Stripe in the end. So this is some example how you can start. You create application domain infrastructure folder. In this example, I use Symfony. So I added this kernel because I need to somehow invoke Symfony application. In the other part, I created Symfony project from the scratch, like Symfony start something, Symfony create project, something like that. And I got those 4 folders and that kernel again. And in the end, we have the same thing. We have the same logic, but we just separate it a little bit more clear, and we modeled it toward that business rules. And we didn't put we created that reservation room entity in the end on the both sides. But here we put it in domain with only pure PHP objects and pure domain behavior, and on the left side we put it in an entity folder. And we bound it with the ORM. So our entity and our business behavior is bound with ORM. So we added maybe those annotations or attributes from doctrine above every property. So we bound it. If we change ORM or if we change something on the domain object, we are changing entity and vice versa. And by doing this, we put our domain as a plain reservation object because our system needs a reservation. And then in the infrastructure, we bind it with ORM. That's the only difference. We created probably this similar amount of code, but just restructured it a little bit different. One thing why I intentionally screenshot this kernel, it's from the beginning of the presentation. DDD is concept, and hexagonal architecture is implementation of that concept, but everything is high level. But I said you don't need to blindly follow some rules, because if my Symfony project need kernel PHP class with some Symfony classes extended there just to have an ability to run it, I need to have that kernel PHP. I will put it somewhere there, maybe in infrastructure, maybe in a SRC folder or whatever the framework asks me to do that. So I'm just conforming to framework just in order to have ability to run it. So I don't blindly follow rules. I need to have application domain and infrastructure folder. That's all. I need to have that. I will remove that kernel PHP and spend 20 hours and rewrote half of the Symfony just to remove it from SRC folder. I won't do that if it will took me so much time. I'll just leave it in a SRC folder and it's okay. Like you see, but we have application domain infrastructure. We separated our business logic in separate folder. We have some orchestration tool in application folder. Everything's okay. We just put that one class that needs to be there in order to have application ability to run. And we'll do that, why not? Also, we will use Symfony, and Symfony will generate us a public folder with index.php because it works like front controller pattern. It will generate us .env files because of environment variables, and that's perfectly fine. We will have that around src folder. We don't need to purely have only those 3 folders there. We'll use everything else in order to bootstrap our project and to speed the development. But we just separated it and started our project from scratch by separating it in 3 different folders and grouping them with that DDD and concept by using hexagonal architecture. So when you start, some advices: make a slow start. Don't start looking at some examples of some projects that were made by this concept and that were maybe that are maintaining and being developed for, I don't know, 5 years. Don't look at that. Start slow, implement 3 folders, implement everything about under 1 domain. Start with that. Start easily modeling things, some business inputs, start modeling them inside domain. Start orchestrating them with the application level and implement some framework that you are familiar with. Also, that bounded context and that part is, for me, important, because what I saw is that business starts to give you some inputs, and you start grouping things inside the domain, and business doesn't know all the requirements, and business doesn't know everything what needs to be done. They slowly start to give you some information, and you slowly start to build that 1 domain, put everything under 1 domain. Then during the time your application will evolve, and then you can extract some things in the domain in separate domain. You have multiple different domains, but start with 1, and then extract it later when you see the need for that. What I also saw is that people start to extracting the domains in the start of the project. Then we end up with a reservation as separate domain, room as separate domain, user as separate domain, payment as separate domain, and that's all really 1 domain, because user is paying for reserving the room. That's one thing. Of course, there are 4 objects, maybe 25 value objects under the hood, maybe, I don't know, how many properties and some rules written down there. But they are one thing. You can't reserve room without paying, so they must live together. So they are all 1 domain. So start with 1 domain, and maybe even make a mistake and put more than you need in 1 domain. And then you will later extract it. It's not a problem. Create 1 more set of folders, application, domain, infrastructure, and extract 1 part. You will copy paste some code, delete it from, let's call it old domain, and you're good to go. So the question is, do you really need your DDD in your project? Yes and no. It's not a golden bullet, and it's not some thing that you must follow, that you must implement in every project, that you must do like I showed you here. This is just a concept. You must think about that. Start using it, maybe abandon it. Think about end goal of the project. Will your project be with some large set of business rules, or your project will be, I don't know, some CLI command that needs to update a few records in the database? Think about the project timeline and budget. Is that some proof of concept that you just need to do in 3 days just to prove that technically it can be done and it can be delivered? And that's just proof of concept, and then later you will make real project and real implementation, and you will make some big thing out of that. If the answer is that it's a small project, it has no strict business rules, it is just some small CLI project that it will update some records in the database, probably you don't need DDD, hexagonal architecture, and you don't need to spend time on separating things in different domains, taking care of different implementations, making, I don't know, interface for every part of your application. You don't need it, because it's just CLI command with probably one class, and that will just create few records in the database. You don't need it. It's proof of concept. You need to do it in 3 days. Just add some boilerplate code and modify 5 records, 5 entities, create 5 records in database, you are done. Few hours later, you have working proof of concept, working solution. You don't need it. But if you will have a lot of business requirements, if it will be a project that will be maintained for a long time, if it's a long-term project that you maybe sign a contract with someone for 5 years, and you are going to starting to building that project, and you will maintain it, you will add new features, you will modify existing feature, and it will be some never-ending project that will live, then probably you'll need this, because it will be a lot of easier to work and live later when the project evolves. It will be a lot easier to switch parts, move parts, implement new things. For example, what I saw, payment gateway. Probably you will start with one payment gateway, later business will tell you, we cut off deal with them and we want some other payment gateway. You will use Doctrine as ORM, and probably after some time, some queries might be slow because of Doctrine. And you will need to implement maybe different ORM or make a raw query. You won't touch any part of the domain or the application, you will just make other implementation, you will make your raw query inside the infrastructure part, you are done. So those are things that will happen to you. Maybe you will return some JSON in some controller later because of some legacy system that is connecting to you, we will need to return XML. And the things will evolve. Business will demand you different things, and if that's the situation, and if that's the something that you are working on, then probably you will need this. Probably it will make your life easier in the long term. It will give you a little bit more time to start with the DDD concept and hexagonal architecture and building things like that. But it's not that you will lose double or triple time that you'll need by making just some Symfony start, Laravel start, or something like that. You will lose maybe 10% more time, just my personal experience. So to set up things, maybe I'm making few more interfaces and making something more in configuration. That's all. You will spend some more time, but in the end, you will save a lot of time and money to that business owner that you are working on application later on while project is going. Yeah, questions?
Hi. What do you think about different approach when you are using 4 layers instead of 3? I mean the user interface, because I didn't see it here.
In the example, I put user interface inside the infrastructure, and that's one thing that that's connected with the first thing that I said. You don't need to blindly follow that. I worked on a project where you have application domain infrastructure UI. I also worked in some project where you have domain infrastructure UI. I worked on a project where people use domain application and infrastructure, then UI is in infrastructure. So that's all the same concept. That's why hexagonal architecture is something technology agnostic and some just guidelines. So it's perfectly fine if you extract your user interface inside a separate folder. It's fine to keep it in infrastructure because it is vendor part.
Yeah, but I mean, I do not mean the front end, but I mean the controller commands.
I'm also referring to that. I put a controller in infrastructure, but you can extract it in separate 4th layer. You can also have application layer divided in 2 layers, application and something else. If you as a team decided that, that's okay and that's a good approach. Again, you are not breaking DDD rules or hexagonal architecture rules. You are not breaking anything. It's just a guideline. Then you will have infrastructure and UI part, that where you put controllers. They will both have everything from the vendor inside, but you agreed that you will have controllers only in UI part, and in infrastructure you won't put controllers. That's something that you as a team come as a decision. You are following that and using it like that. You are not breaking anything. It's perfectly fine. And like see here, I put in infrastructure driven and driving. That driving is that UI part. So yeah, you can separate that driving part in separate.
It's just because for me it's much clearer if the user interface calls the application calls the domain, and domain is hydrated with infrastructure. So
it's perfectly normal and okay. And also like this, I also like to divide infrastructure in driven and driving. Then driving is that UI part. I'm just removing that. But I also worked on projects where you have a UI part separate, and it's okay. But that's that thing that the team must come to some decisions how it will be done. And you must conform to it. It can be a situation where you put it in UI and you put controllers there, and I come there and I put controllers in infrastructure. So we must say, okay, we are using two parts of the infrastructure and UI. And that's, for me, perfectly fine. I hope it answers your question.
Yeah.
Thank you for presentation. I wanted to ask about application layer, because I saw you have repository directory there. So I wanted to ask, why did you put repository into application layer, as it's definitely like a domain part? Because we should think about how we should retrieve data. The implementation will be in infrastructure, but application should not know how we retrieve data, because interfaces should be in domain part, because application layer just interacts with entities or aggregates which you realized in domain, and not with description of repository.
Thanks for that question. And first what I want to say is all those screenshots of the folder structure is not something that is, this is DDD, this is hexagonal architecture, you must do it like that. It's a similar question like you asked, I also saw a lot of discussion in the internet, in the different literatures, in different books. When you read about that, someone wants to say that repository, it's orchestrated with the domain. It stores things in some storage mechanism. It's a part of the domain. And other people say that a repository is just orchestration tool under the domain. So if the domain are business rules, someone from business, you must care about how you store your data, of course, but business is not telling you, store me the reservation in some storage system. Business tells you, please store me, I need to have a user ability to pay for reserving the room. And they are not telling about you about the storage mechanism. So some people then like to put the repository in the application, not in the domain. So this is just screenshots of some random project and some random folder structure I have in my code base. But it's not the hard rules that you must conform it like that. I also worked on projects and I'm currently working on a project where you have a repository in the domain. And that's also perfectly fine, but there must be some settlement behind the team, like we will put it here because of this and that. Do we agree with that? We must make some agreement and put it in one of the folders, where we think it should live. But I understand your question and agree with you about that part. But in the end, it's about some our concept and vision how we should structure our folders.
That concept, domain cannot call the repository.
No, it can't. It can't. Because repository is in the application, and some dummy flow of the application request comes in. It will hit the controller after your framework resolves the URL and sees that there is controller bound to that URL. It will hit the controller. Controller will probably dispatch some command, for example, like create user command, and it will dispatch in command bus. And then command bus will invoke command handler. Command handler is $user equals to new user. and will create a user. And then command handler will call the repository same with the user. And that's repository interface, of course, because they are both on application level, and command handler and repository. They are orchestrating with the domain. One created a user, one saved the user. Of course, real saving is done on infrastructure, on concrete implementation, but yeah, you are just calling that interface stored with the user. So yeah, in that case, domain cannot call the repository. That's correct. Sorry, I don't know, is this answering your question? And
hello. Okay, so I've got a question. If you've got two domains and one of them is dispatching events, domain events, and you want to use that event inside of another domain, so how can you accomplish that? Because it's like specific domain, a specific event for one domain. So can you use it directly, or should you use primitives or like common interface, or
yeah,
what's your approach?
So basically your question is about communication between two different domains. Yes. Yeah, they can communicate the maybe most complicated things and most expensive, but mostly clear approach would be to make HTTP requests. So those both two domains are behaving like two separate projects. They are communicating with HTTP requests like your front end and your project. That's the one approach. Second approach is you can have some shared domain. For example, those domain events, what you said, can live in some shared domain, and then they can both interact with it. So one domain will dispatch some domain event in shared domain, and we'll have some handler that will handle it in different domain. So that's also another approach. Third approach is to have some also shared, but not shared events, but shared entire domains. So you have room, reservation, and user. So room is here, reservation is here, different domains, and then user is common for both of them. Then you can use it also like that. So those are all different approaches. Again, we come with that. It's not some blind rules, you must do that. So like a repository like UI question, this is also something you need to see what's the best approach for you. But yeah, you can use shared domain, you can make HTTP requests between them. Something like that should solve the problem, and domains can communicate with each other.
Okay, thank you.
And sorry, just one thing, what you said about the scalars. Yeah, probably they should put the scalars so other domain can hydrate those scalars inside their specific objects. So it's more clear like that. It's like dispatching commands. In command you dispatch scalars. You don't dispatch entire object because you don't know who will handle that command. Tomorrow you can make some command handler in Go or Python that will be completely different application that will handle that specific commands that you are pushing in a message queue, for example.
So, for example, in second domain, I can make a listener or subscriber in the infrastructure. Then I can extract those primitives and call my application layer.
Call your application or create your domain object from those primitives, and then start to work in the different domain in that second domain with your new object. But that domain is invoked by command handler or query handler or whatever, event handler from your infrastructure side, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, if there is no more questions, no one? Yeah, we can finish. This is the link. You can rate my talk. I'll appreciate the feedback. And yeah, if you have any more questions later, I'll be there today and tomorrow until 11 probably. So catch me there.